Sergio Barraza got up early on the morning of Friday, January 25th, 2019, got ready, and went to work. His wife, 29-year-old Liz, went about setting up a garage sale on their quiet street in the Houston suburb of Tomball, Texas. Liz's preparations were interrupted when an unknown individual pulled up in a pickup truck, exchanged a few words, and then shot Liz in broad daylight in her own driveway. The entire exchange was caught on camera, but the case has gone cold, with investigators no closer to answers than they were 5.5 years ago. And Liz's case sits in a box in a basement.
Hello, and welcome to Box in the Basement podcast. I'm your host, Arlene.
And I'm Leah.
In the last 50 years, the U.S. has had nearly 1 million homicides, and since then, over 250,000 cases sit in a box in a basement where all hopes for justice go to die. In 1996, someone shot my uncle Leon Laurelis, changing my life forever and leaving a devastating hole in my heart, and his case remains unsolved. Join me and my wife, Leah, as we shed light on these forgotten victims, their life, the loved ones they left behind, the evidence, and the theories of who committed these crimes, leaving communities in fear and leaving families without answers. Support our effort to change the justice system through the Homicide Families Victims' Rights Act, as we hope to make a difference with our audience as we remember the victims and demand justice. In 1996, my world was shattered when my uncle Leon Laurelis was shot execution style in a small town in Texas. To this day, his murder remains unsolved, and the pain of that injustice continues to haunt me, my family, and Leon's friends and coworkers. Here at Box in the Basement, we want to shed light on the overwhelming number of unsolved murders and disappearances here in Texas and beyond. We want to bring awareness to the lesser-known cases that got little to no attention, in hopes that someone listening will come forward with any information, because we strongly believe all lives matter. Ultimately, we want to get justice for Leon and for all the victims whose cases are sitting, collecting dust in a box in a basement. Please note that this episode contains depictions of violence that some people may find disturbing. Listener discretion is advised. Please like and follow our pages on all social media platforms for Box in the Basement Podcast and Justice for Leon Laurelis. And now you can also find us on YouTube.
2019 seems so close yet so far away. U.S. President Trump froze aid to El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras in an attempt to quell the steady stream of refugees fleeing grinding poverty and violence in those countries. Religious nationalism came to India with a vengeance under Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The U.S.-China trade war dragged on. 23 people were killed in a targeted massacre against Latinos in a Walmart in El Paso, Texas. Massive demonstrations took over Hong Kong, and students in 125 countries skipped school to participate in the global climate strike, drawing attention to environmental issues. The U.S. women's national soccer team won its 4th World Cup. Tiger Woods made an impressive comeback at the Masters before taking his 5th title. The Toronto Raptors won Canada its first NBA championship, and the University of Virginia defeated Texas Tech for the NCAA basketball championship. Post Malone was number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 the week of January 25th with Sunflower. Dan and Shay topped the country charts with Speechless. Glass, starring Bruce Willis and Samuel L. Jackson, ruled the box office that week. And number 1 on the New York Times bestseller list was Verses for the Dead by Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child. Tomball, Texas is a suburb of Houston, located just to the northeast of the city. It's really named after a guy whose actual name was Tomball. He was a Texas congressman at the turn of the 20th century. His corporate interests made him an influential character in the area. Yes, Tomball grew up around a railroad too, just like most of the other towns we've talked about. The first outside settlers moved into the area to raise cattle and grow crops like rice, peanuts, and cotton. Developers noted that the location of what is now Tomball would be ideal for a train station, and that's exactly what they built. Businesses grew up around the train station, and eventually the oil boom came to town. Today, the local economy does maintain some energy sector influence. Baker Hughes is still there, but it's mostly oriented around services, healthcare, and retail. Today, the population of Tomball is right around 14,200 people, and it would have been slightly lower, closer to 12,000 in 2019 when this happened.
Elizabeth Marie Newell was born on June 26, 1989, in Elk Grove Village, Illinois, to Robert and Rosemary Newell. She was the second of 2 children and had an older brother, Robert III. Growing up, the Newell family moved around a few times, living in Illinois, Missouri, and Florida before landing in Texas. Liz graduated from Klein Collins High School in 2008, then initially enrolled in Stephen F. Austin State University before transferring to Sam Houston State her sophomore year. She graduated in 2012 with a degree in psychology and then married Sergio Barraza on February 1st, 2014. They moved into their house on Cedar Walk Drive in a nice subdivision in Tomball. Liz worked as a data reporter for the Rosen Group, which from what I can gather is a firm that does life cycle management for technology, asset integrity, risk management, and that kind of a thing. And I think her office in particular did inspections on oil and gas pipelines. Sergio worked for his father installing flooring. Liz loved Harry Potter and Star Wars. She and Sergio loved Star Wars so much, in fact, that they belonged to an organization called the 501st Legion, which is basically a big group of people from all over the world who dress up as Star Wars characters and go do cool things. The chapter Liz and Sergio belonged to primarily went and visited sick kids in the local hospitals, which is honestly pretty amazing. They also like to make their own costumes for Renaissance fairs. Liz is described as warm and cheerful, always ready with a smile and a kind word, and always happy. The couple was planning on going to World of Harry Potter in Orlando on January 27th, just 2 days after Liz was killed. They were celebrating their 5th wedding anniversary. Their bags were already packed. Liz had some custom shoes made for the trip, and they were ready to go. And that's why Liz took that Friday off work, so she could host a garage sale and make a little extra money to have for the trip. It was kind of a last-minute thing, so Liz put up a few signs in her neighborhood advertising the sale and let a few friends and family members know, but never got around to posting anything on social media.
This will become important later on as we discuss theories.
So Liz got up early on that Friday morning to set up for her garage sale. She did a Starbucks run at 6:10 a.m., and then she and Sergio started putting things out for the sale. Sergio left for work around 6:45, and Liz continued getting things ready. There are people out there who are practically professionals at the garage sale circuit. They'll be on the curb tapping their toes by a quarter till whatever time you open for business. Sergio left for work, and then you can see from the footage taken from the couple's doorbell camera that a dark-colored 2013-ish Nissan Frontier pickup truck pulled up to the curb across the street from the Barraza residence just before 7 a.m. Someone, assumed to be a woman wearing a wig, boots, and either a bathrobe or a trench coat, exited the truck and walked across the street. Liz looked up, saw this person, and said, "Good morning." And then she appears to be startled or caught off guard. She takes a couple steps back. The person in the disguise pulls out a gun and starts shooting. A neighbor called 911 at 6:53 a.m. and reported hearing 4 gunshots across the street at the Barraza house and saw a Nissan Frontier leaving the scene. There are videos from other neighbors' doorbell and security cameras floating around out there. And folks, seriously, if you're trolling around looking for them, exercise caution. Most of them show the entire incident, and it is really disturbing.
EMTs showed up within minutes of the call, and police cleared and secured the scene so they could tend to Liz. In doing so, police triggered the Barraza's home security alarm, which alerted Liz's parents. They were the emergency contact. Liz's parents rushed to the house, but by the time they got there, they were notified that Liz had been life-flighted to Memorial Hermann Hospital in Houston. Sergio also got a notification for the alarm, and he opened up his Ring app and looked at the live footage from his camera and saw police officers milling around. He backed up a few minutes and saw the video of Liz being shot by the person in the truck. He drove home as fast as he could, and he was suddenly detained by law enforcement for questioning, but was let go pretty quickly. Investigators immediately dove into the couple's Ring camera footage, in addition to some other video from neighbors' cameras, and put together the following timeline. At 6:47 a.m., a dark Nissan Frontier entered the neighborhood and pulled into a nearby school's parking lot. Just a few seconds later, the truck leaves the parking lot and goes out of view, and Sergio can be seen leaving the Cedar Walk Drive house in his work van. At 6:51, the Nissan truck is seen again on security camera footage heading towards the Barraza home. At 6:52, the driver of the truck can be seen executing a 3-point turn and then parking behind Liz Barraza's car. The shooter then exited the truck, approached Liz, shot her 3 times, and then once more after she fell to the ground, then ran back to the truck and is seen just a few minutes later driving past the Barraza house again.
So there's no doubt this was a planned attack. We just don't know what the circumstances and motives were. Investigators continued to scour the footage from the various security cameras in the neighborhood, and they discovered that about 6 hours before the shooting, a dark-colored Nissan Frontier could be seen in the neighborhood and drove past the Barraza home. It was 2 a.m., so I'm not sure how clear the footage is and if it's been determined that this absolutely was the same truck, but it seems a little too coincidental to me. Though investigators were able to determine that the truck was a 2013 to 2019 Nissan Frontier Pro 4X, they were never able to actually track down that car. None of the footage from the security cameras caught a clear image of the license plate or any other distinguishing features. Something that is telling to me is that the shooter also managed to park their car and approach Liz without their face being caught on the Ring camera or any of the neighbors' security cameras. Whether that was intentional or just dumb luck, I don't know.
So obviously, police looked at Sergio first because the husband or partner or spouse is almost always the first person of interest. It seemed a little too convenient for investigators that Liz was killed just a few short minutes after Sergio left for work. Investigators couldn't find much here, though. Liz and Sergio were a pretty normal couple who was having fun and enjoying their life together. There was no evidence that could be gathered from their phones, other devices, finances, or social media that indicated they were having any real problems. It was pretty obvious from the video that the person who shot Liz wasn't Sergio. This person was much smaller in stature, and the logistics and timing would have had to have been intricately planned for that to happen. One might think that maybe if Sergio wasn't involved in the actual shooting, maybe he hired someone to kill his wife? This seemed a little far-fetched, though, and investigators couldn't find any evidence that Sergio exchanged money with anyone in the days prior to or immediately after the shooting. I think the couple did okay for themselves. They seemed solidly middle class based on their job descriptions and the neighborhood they lived in. They were doing a last-minute garage sale for extra spending money for their upcoming vacation. Doesn't seem like they'd have the kind of cash laying around you'd need for a paid hit. But as we all can attest to, you never really know what goes on behind closed doors. And it's important to note that Sergio Barraza was never officially cleared as a suspect. We'll talk a little bit more about this when we get into theories. Investigators looked into the couple's circle for other leads. All of Liz's co-workers were clocked in that Friday, and the timelines didn't fit for their involvement to make sense. The couple had quite a few friends, but there really wasn't anyone who had any obvious issue with Liz. There's one minor conflict we'll talk about later on, but nobody in the friend group really stood out. Plus, nobody drove a dark-colored Nissan Frontier. The couple put signs out in the neighborhood either the night before or early that morning of the garage sale. But this was a small suburban subdivision, not a main thoroughfare. That's not to say some rando couldn't have used it as an opportunity to attack or kill someone, but it does make it less likely. The couple hadn't advertised the sale on social media or in the newspaper or anything like that. They told some friends and family members, but that was pretty much it.
The days, weeks, and months passed, and investigators developed a few new leads and persons of interest, but never had enough to make an arrest. A warrant was issued sometime in early 2021, but I don't have access to any more information on that front. Around the same time, police released the doorbell cam footage from the Barraza's front door to the public in the hopes of finding more information on the perpetrator and/or the Nissan truck. In 2022, police issued a statement to the public that they theorized Liz's killer used a revolver since there were no shell casings found at the scene. In the videos, it's pretty clear that the shooter does not bend down to pick anything up from the ground, and they leave the scene pretty quickly, so I feel pretty good about that particular assessment. I don't know for sure what caliber the bullets were that killed Liz, but I've seen several quote-unquote best guesses that it was a .380, which isn't super common, but it's definitely a good option for a concealed carry weapon. .380 revolvers are small, about the size of a cell phone. Charter Arms and Taurus make some pretty good options for that particular type of gun. They are relatively inexpensive and easy to find, they're simple to use, and they're extremely reliable. Plus, you have the added bonus of not leaving shell casings behind. It's a choice that makes a lot of sense.
The FBI and the Texas Rangers stepped in to help local law enforcement with the investigation, opening up access to a much wider selection of forensic testing. Unfortunately, it's been over 6 years, and nothing has come of this investigation. Though it's cooled significantly, the Harris County Sheriff's Office refuses to classify the case as cold. They have a team consistently and actively working on it. The loss of Liz Barraza has left a huge hole in the hearts of her family, friends, and fellow volunteers at the 501st Legion chapter. Liz was a kind and caring person, and her presence in the volunteer community is missed terribly. Crime Stoppers currently has a huge reward for information about Liz's death, and this is one of the more high-profile cases in terms of Texas unsolved murders. Sergio remarried a few years later after Liz died, but he and Liz's family remain close. Liz's parents, Bob and Rosemary, run a website dedicated to Liz's case, and community efforts have kept her memory fresh throughout the past 6 years. That website is called Who Killed Liz Newell Barraza? So with that being said, what do we think happened to Liz Barraza on the morning of January 25th, 2019?
Well, we know what happened, it's just a matter of who did it. So like we said earlier, the first person investigators looked at was Sergio, Liz's husband of 5 years, and that's pretty standard in homicide cases. Over a third of female homicide victims in the U.S. are killed by an intimate partner. There are some things that raise some red flags at first, but I'm not 100% sure what to make of them. First off, Sergio seemed kind of emotionless when police showed him the Ring camera footage of Liz being shot. I personally don't make too much of this. Maybe that's me and my autistic self projecting. I rarely have what could be described as an appropriate or proportional response to any given crisis. I will be cool as a cucumber while listening to a convoy in my unit actively being attacked by insurgents in Iraq, but I will have an absolute meltdown if I drop a fork on the ground. It just depends. Sometimes people hear or see or experience something so horrible and unbelievable, their brain just shuts down. And I think that might have been what happened here. Like you're there, you can see and hear everything, but your emotions are just drained completely from your body. So I don't think this means shit, but who knows?
There are a couple of other red flags that came up early on. First, Sergio initially claimed that the couple put out signs in the neighborhood advertising the yard sale that morning, Friday the 25th. Later on, he changed his story to say that the couple did in fact put out signs the evening before. I have no confirmation one way or the other, but the important thing here is that Sergio changed his story. I acknowledge that it could have very easily been him misspeaking or misremembering. I have trouble remembering what I had for breakfast in the morning, and that involves no trauma and no police interrogations. So I'm not really sure what to make of this. If the signs were put out the night before, then if this was a random psychopath looking for a good target, that's important information. If the signs weren't put out until the next morning, it was more than likely a friend or family who committed, since we saw what happened to the same Nissan truck driving through the neighborhood hours before the garage sale. The other inconsistency with Sergio is that it took him over 30 minutes to get back home that morning after Liz was shot. So we said Sergio left for work at 6:47 that morning? He made a stop at Lowe's for supplies before heading to work. However, that's where he received the Ring notification. Remember, he installed flooring for a living, so morning stops at the hardware store would not be unusual. In reality, the drive from that particular Lowe's to the Barraza house would have been 10 minutes, 12 at the most. So where was Sergio? Again, this is a little fishy, obviously, but I don't know if it's enough to set off any alarm bells. If Sergio was loading up his van and had doors open and supplies all over the place, it might have taken him a few minutes to pack up or at least move things enough so he could leave. Traffic could have been bad. This was during rush hour. He may have overestimated how long the drive was in his conversations with law enforcement. Or he could be lying and had some other nefarious reason. We just don't know. One last thing that kind of caught the attention of the cops was that Sergio repeated numerous times how paranoid he was about Liz holding the garage sale alone that morning. On the one hand, this is just a guy maybe blaming himself a little bit for this tragic thing that's happened to his wife. If only he'd taken the morning off or insisted her mom be with her, something like that. On the other hand, it just seems a little strange, like he's covering his ass after the fact. One thing that does make me suspicious is that after he gets to his house and the police question and release him, he just kind of stalls and hangs around the house. One would think he would jump in his car and speed to the hospital to see his grievously injured wife. But he stays at the scene talking to people. To be fair, we don't know if Sergio was texting with her parents and they're telling him not to rush because she's in surgery. We also know that Liz was admitted to Memorial Hermann under a fake name for her safety just in case the shooter came after her again. So maybe he was encouraged to stay away? Or maybe something more sinister was going on. We don't know.
And that's a good segue into the next possibility that it was someone who knew Liz or had some connection to her. Paula Zahn did an episode on this case, and in it, Sergio claimed that his father was upset with Liz and had badmouthed her on numerous occasions. I believe that some of Sergio's paychecks had bounced. Remember, he worked for his dad, and Liz was understandably upset about this. Sergio also mentioned that he had confronted his dad about the bounced checks, and he accused his father of spending his money on women and other extracurricular activities instead of using it for payroll. Was this enough for Sergio's dad to hire a hitman to murder Liz? I have serious doubts. If he was out spending money on his side chicks to the point he couldn't pay his own son for labor, something tells me he wasn't out hiring assassins. Since we don't have access to the case file, all we have is Sergio's interviews to go on, though. So who else might have had motive to kill Liz? One theory I've seen floating around is that this was a friend from one of the couple's circles, possibly the convention scene, Ren Fair scene, their cosplay volunteer organization, something like that. Liz was the social director for her chapter of the 501st Legion. So was this some bitter rival in the organization? Someone she'd pissed off? Was it someone who maybe had a thing for Sergio and sought to eliminate Liz and get her out of the way? Was it just some weirdo fan with some delusion or parasocial relationship with one or both of them? Look, I'll level with you. Arlene and I belong to several fan clubs for musicians that we like. We travel to other states and even other countries to see these people live. We have paid memberships. We follow them on social media. But having said that, we have been to enough festivals, shows, and fan events to know that we don't even register on the weird scale. People get crazy when it comes to their special interests and fandoms, whether they have to do with comic books or Star Wars or music. It becomes their entire personality, and it can really screw with somebody's reality. So is this a situation like that? Is this some weird delusion in a fellow cosplayer's brain or convention attendee that led them to believe that Liz was a rival or somehow an enemy that needed to be eliminated?
I actually find this to be fairly plausible. When Sergio was questioned about his wife's friends and colleagues, he did mention a disagreement she'd had with another member of the 501st Legion. He was pretty adamant, however, that this was just dumb girl drama, a petty disagreement, nothing that would warrant cold-blooded murder. That doesn't necessarily mean it wasn't far more serious than Sergio knew or was letting on. And like you said, this could be something that was totally one-sided. A fellow volunteer or an acquaintance from conventions or whatever could have absolutely had some beef, real or imaginary, with one or both the Barrazas. I've seen it mentioned in several places that the disguise the attacker wore could have been part of a costume. The big jacket or robe and the tall boots. Some people have theorized that they're stormtrooper boots, like from the Star Wars movies. But I have no idea if that's actually been confirmed. In any case, investigators theorize from the doorbell camera footage that Liz didn't know her attacker. You can hear her say good morning pretty clearly, but she didn't acknowledge the person by name. People who knew Liz insisted that if she'd known the person who approached her in the driveway that morning, that she would have used their name, like good morning, Susan, or hi, Jennifer, something like that. But investigators are also pretty sure that the person who killed Liz was wearing a disguise. So even if it was someone Liz knew or knew of, she may not have recognized them, at least not right away. Also, she could have absolutely known the person who shot her and just elected not to use their name. I realize people have habits and whatnot, but there are always exceptions. One thing that does support the theory that Liz didn't know her attacker, or at least didn't know them well, is the fact that the truck was seen in the neighborhood about 6 hours before the shooting happened. It's almost as if this person was casing the area, checking it out. Maybe driving around the neighborhood to find entrances, exits, and alternate routes.
So one thing I want to point out here is that Liz and Sergio's neighborhood isn't one of those places you end up by accident or pass through while driving across town. It's a suburban subdivision full of cul-de-sacs and loops and dead ends. You go there for a reason, whether that reason is to come home from work because you live there, or you're going to someone's house for a garage sale or more nefarious end. I think it's very possible the person who killed Liz went to the neighborhood the night before in order to figure out where the house was and to look at exit strategies. I'm once again drawn back to that scene in Gone in 60 Seconds where the crew is trapped in a suburban neighborhood because everything looks the same and they can't find the exit. I don't think the truck actually stopped in front of the Barraza house overnight. It was just seen in the neighborhood.
So that actually brings up a good point I forgot to mention earlier. During the course of the initial investigation, several of the Barraza's neighbors didn't have alibis, or at least couldn't be accounted for during the time Liz was murdered. Now, at first blush, that does seem a bit suspicious. This garage sale was only advertised by word of mouth and a few signs in the neighborhood, so it had to be either someone in the neighborhood or someone in the couple's close circle. But unless there's some kind of a conflict with a neighbor that investigators didn't turn up or aren't releasing to the public, I'm not sure how likely I think this scenario is. I realize many people aren't as antisocial as we are. We lived in this house for 6 years, and I don't think I could pick any of my neighbors out of a lineup. We've knocked on a neighbor's door when they were having a huge, loud party at 3 a.m. on a school night, and that's usually the kind of clashes neighbors have. The fence needs repairing, your dog's pooped on my lawn, the music is too loud. And from what I've read, there's no evidence that there were any major clashes with neighbors.
Right. Unless there was some kind of serious drama we simply aren't aware of, it seems like a neighbor killing Liz is a bit of a stretch. But we know very well that stranger things have happened, and people kill folks for dumb shit all the time. This seems too well planned for a spur-of-the-moment murder, though, and the fact that the car wasn't able to be identified as belonging to a neighbor, and they were seen trolling around hours before, makes it less believable that a neighbor was responsible, unless it was a hit, which is what you're going to talk about next, Arlene.
I know we kind of implied that this could be a random attack, but I really just don't see that as the answer here. Not totally impossible, but it just seems unlikely given the circumstances of the attack and the location of the Barraza's house. Someone did this on purpose. Someone was mad enough at Liz to want her dead, and they went to great lengths to do so and cover their tracks. Again, we don't know who might have ordered the hit. Was it Sergio? Was it an angry friend or acquaintance? That we don't know. But to me, this screams hit. You have a vehicle that seemingly disappeared. Nobody in the couple's friend group or close circle drove a truck like that. You have the disguise. You have the suspicious vehicle casing the neighborhood hours before the attack. You have the fact that this person waited until Liz was alone, but shot her before the garage sale was set to begin. You have the lack of shell casings. It all seems a bit too perfect for a random shooting or a last-minute thing. But as we've said, we aren't eliminating any possibilities here, just kind of talking things through.
I think if it was a last-minute thing, it was just one of those scenarios where everything lined up just right. Perhaps this was someone who had killed before, so they knew what they were doing and what to look for. They went out trolling for yard sale ads, saw a sign, and then did what they were going to do to someone somewhere. Kind of like people who ambush realtors at open houses and showings. It could also be someone who used that as a cover, make it look like that was the case, but in reality it was someone close to Liz or the couple.
If your theory is correct, then wouldn't we have heard about other cases of murders and shootings of people having yard sales? I don't know. In any case, that's where we are with Liz Barraza's murder today. If you have any information on who might have shot and killed her outside of her own home on the morning of January 25th, 2019, please call Houston Crime Stoppers at 713-222-TIPS. That's 713-222-8477. Or you can submit a tip at www.crimestoppers.org. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the podcast creators, host, and guest. If you or someone you know is a victim of crime, support is available. Call 855-4-VICTIM to speak with someone who can help you understand your rights and options. Visit victimconnect.org to learn more. We are excited to announce that we are now a part of the Darkcast Network. Darkcast Network, the best in indie podcasts. Check out all the great shows at darkcastnetwork.com. I'd also like to ask that you sign my petition for my Uncle Leon Laurelis' case to be reopened and reviewed with fresh eyes. And you can find our petition on change.org. I also have a GoFundMe page to hire an attorney to help me get a copy of his autopsy that I have been denied for 27 years. You can find the GoFundMe by searching for Leon Laurelis. That's Laureles.
but to get his body exhumed to search for evidence that was not collected the first time around. Thank you for joining us. Be kind. Later, Gators.